I have to do that first. Now I will share my screen. Okay, and you should be seeing my PowerPoint slides on the screen. I think it's important to provide context for what we're doing with Decisions First. It's an unusual program, as I mentioned, for those of you who were at the Data 610 orientation or intro or overview, whatever you want to call it. One of the key things we want to focus on early on is framing the problem. I'm teaching right now, of course, Data 670, 2 sections of the capstone course, and I can honestly say that there are still students in that course using Decisions First because it's very important to frame what you're going to do in that capstone course. So this is a program, as are all of our programs, that will be available to you throughout your tenure in the MSDA program. So something to keep in mind. You may or may not find it as useful as others, but it certainly does one thing well, which I'll talk about. Okay, agenda. I'm going to do a little overview, talk about the software, and I'll do the walkthrough, then come back to the assignment, flesh that out a little bit more for you, since you're going to be using Decisions First in your first assignment. Now, where do we start? Well, you know, when we designed the program 4.5 years ago, in spring of 2014, I was one of the original designers, and we were using a book at that time by Tom Davenport called Keeping Up with the Quants. And the reason we were using a book for this course and for sort of set the context for the whole program is we really liked what he said in the book. Now, Tom is one of the giants in the business of analytics. You will see lots of articles by him. He also started the Association of Analytics. So there's a lot of things from Tom Davenport. But in his book, he pointed out 3 steps to a good analytical solution. Frame the problem, solve the problem, communicate and act on the results. Frame, solve, communicate, and act. So this first program that you're using in Data 610 to get you started is, of course, designed to frame the problem. And you see there's a lot of aspects of that. What is the problem? How serious is it? Who's going to do it? Where are we going to get the data? What kind of data do we need? What analytical model should we use? How will we measure results, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Framing is all important. We've seen evidence over the years now that if you don't start out with a good frame, you're doomed. Now, starting out with a good frame doesn't guarantee success, but starting out without a good frame guarantees failure. You've got to know what you're doing. You can't just wander into a data set and say, I'm just going to look around and see if I happen to find something interesting. You have to go with a purpose. Otherwise, the results of many analytics endeavors over the last 10 years have shown abject failure in about 85% of the time. So our first software product for the course is one that does exactly that. I think it's about the best I've ever seen at framing the problem, framing the decision to be made. And you can see the nice quote here by Albert Einstein. He said, if he had an hour to save the planet, he would spend 59 minutes framing the problem and 1 minute resolving it. We're not going to spend 59/60ths of your course effort in this program framing, but we are going to spend a couple of weeks. And I think that's not nearly enough, but it will certainly give you enough context that you can take it from there with practice and experience. Now, Mr. James Taylor is the owner, author, and proprietor of Decisions First. James and I have actually presented at conferences together because he likes what we do and we like his software. We use it, as you know, in the cloud. It works well for us. There are many success stories, and Mr. Taylor is a giant among the people in the decision modeling industry. And by the way, that is an industry, decision modeling industry. You'll see many links to his papers and many links to his articles. He's a very prominent person in that endeavor. Anyway, first thing we want to talk a little bit about, just for a moment, is the fact that there are multiple kinds of decisions. And I think you've all heard this before. Strategic decisions are few in number, but have a large impact. And they're usually long-term. You know, whether you're changing your entire product line, whether you're moving your operation overseas, whether you're exiting a market. You know, Apple, of course, used to be not in the phone business, just in the computer business. Now they're primarily in the phone business, aren't they? IBM used to be in the mainframe business. Now they're a software services business. Those are strategic decisions. They're very important. They have a big impact. They're usually few in number, occur very infrequently. kind of in the middle level are the tactical decisions, which are kind of day-to-day, or not really day-to-day, but certainly decisions you make more frequently than strategic. Maybe you're deciding whether or not to use robots in your factory. Maybe you're deciding whether or not to use a contract labor versus in-house labor. Maybe you're deciding whether to use a more automated manufacturing process. Maybe you're changing your product mix. Those are tactical decisions. They have a significant impact. They don't occur as infrequently as strategic decisions. And then last but not least are operational decisions. These are the day-to-day decisions. They occur frequently, over and over and over. They're somewhat routine in that sense. Let me get rid of that if I can. Yes. They're somewhat routine in nature, and each of them has only a very small impact on the bottom line, but collectively, because there are so many of them made so frequently, they have a significant impact on the bottom line. Okay, I mean, if you're a bank or you're a credit card company, and every time somebody uses your credit card, you have to make a decision about whether that should be allowed. That decision is made many, many times per day, and each one individually has, again, a very small impact, but collectively a large impact. Now, why are we talking about this? Well, it's important to understand that Mr. Taylor's software works best for decisions at the operational level. That doesn't mean it can't be used for strategic decisions. It doesn't mean it won't work well for tactical decisions. It can frame any decision, but he likes to advertise, and I think he's right, that it's best suited for operational decisions, and specifically for decisions that have these criteria or these characteristics. They are repeatable. You know, if you're going to build a decision model, you'd like to be able to use it more than once. So repeatable is important. Non-trivial. If the decision is trivial, you don't need a model. Measurable business impact. If the decision does not have any impact at all on your organization, why worry about it? And finally, candidate for automation. Now, that bottom right one is one we won't do too much with in this course. When you get to 640, 650 and start dealing with cognitive computing, start dealing with big data, start dealing with automating of decisions, you will see more impact of that. But if you can organize a decision that is repeatable, non-trivial, and measurable business impact, often through the use of business rules, which we'll say a little bit more about later in this course, you can automate that. So these are the ideal kinds of decisions. So it's important to keep this in mind when you start looking for what decision you're going to model for your first assignment. Now, when we use the DecisionsFirst software, there is a process that it goes through. And the process is quite nice and quite thorough. The first thing you do is identify decisions. You know, why are you even doing this? You must have some decisions to be made, and I'm going to show you an example of one. Of course, Mr. Taylor walks you through in his tutorial in great detail, showing you a decision. But the first thing to do is identify the decisions that have to be made and that will be impacted by the analytics that you're going to use. Then, of course, you have to flesh those out. It's one thing to say we need to make a decision on whether to sell or keep a distressed mortgage. It's something else to describe what that is, because we may all have different definitions of what distress means and how much distress we can allow, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to describe the decisions. The third step is kind of the key one. This is where you start pulling together the pieces that you will need to help make the decision. Anytime there's a decision to be made, what do you need? You need information. You need expertise. You need many sources of data. So you've got to have things that come together. You need people that know what they're doing, people with good cognitive skills. You need people that are rational and clear thinking. We're trying to move again towards a more evidence-based decision process. We're trying to assist you in leveraging the analytics to help your company or your organization move to a more evidence-based decision process. So you specify the requirements. You'll see how this falls out when I get to the demo. Then you go back and refine the requirements. You know, no time that you put the requirements down on paper the first time is going to be complete, especially if you have multiple people involved looking at the decision process. Somebody will say, oh, you forgot this, or oh, we can't do that, or oh, that needs to be modified. And so it's an iterative process. It is an iterative process. Finally, when you're convinced that you have outlined the decision process as thoroughly as possible, you need to generate something called an analytics requirements document. Analytics requirements document. You'll hear me refer to it as an ARD, analytics requirements document. And that's what you're going to produce. You're going to produce an ARD that thoroughly outlines a decision of your choosing, more about that later, using the DecisionsFirst software, and you will then, that will be part of your first assignment. I'll come back to that, as I said, at the end. So with DecisionsFirst software, you go through this process and you decompose it into little pieces, and then you pull the pieces together. Like I said, you're going to need information to help make decisions, aren't you? What kind of information? Well, we have guidelines in our companies and organizations. I have guidelines at UMUC. You have guidelines at your organization. We have policies. We have people with certain levels of expertise that may or may not be documented throughout the organization. Tacit knowledge, as we call it. We have regulations. We use models. Certainly, we use analytics models in this program because that's what we're premising our whole basis on, that analytics models can help you improve the process. We may use some data mining results. We may link decisions together, etc. So this process, as you see it unfold, I think you'll find is very thorough, very complete, and unique. And by the way, if you thought this was a very useful product or process, I would say consider using it in your organization. You could even use a decision in your organization for your first assignment if you so chose, and your organization would allow it. Because I have had many students graduate and say, I'm going to use DecisionsFirst software in my organization because our decision process is so, well, skewed, if you will, towards intuition, hunch, judgment. If you looked at some of those videos for week 1 of the Data 610, you'll see the instances where data, hunch, judgment, experience all fall apart. Whereas I think a more analytic process holds together better. No guarantee that you'll always be right, excuse me, but a greater confidence that you're on the right track. Now, you're going to see screens in a moment. If you've already looked at Mr. Taylor's very thorough walkthrough, that's great. He, of course, being the owner and creator of the software, knows the software much better than I. I think his tutorial is must-watching. I think it's very thorough and very complete. I'm just trying to add a little piece to it here and show you a little bit more perspective that might help you. If you have multiple views of how to use the software, perhaps that's of value. When we get going with DecisionsFirst, you're going to see that the main focus is on 3 kinds of objects. Decision objects, which are key, information objects, which bring in information, data, etc., and knowledge objects, which bring in expertise, policy guidance, whatever it is you have that is in that shape. And you'll see how we fold those in. This is what one of the menus looks like, and I'll be in DecisionsFirst in just a moment. You really only have these 3 kinds of objects on your main menu that you can drag and drop in. You can put comments in to support knowledge behind them. Somebody always asks, so I'll address it now, what are the sketch objects? Well, let's say you weren't sure about this. You weren't sure orders needed to be in there. You drag in a sketch object so that someone looking at this diagram at first blush would say, oh, I see the objects that are not yet complete, the ones I need to address. Remember, this is a piece of software you can use in a group mode, and each person's contributions will be documented. So you're going to get used to this interface. Don't worry about it now if it looks confusing. Every piece of software you ever learn looks confusing at first. There's always a fog factor that rolls in. As you begin to use it and begin to get comfortable with it, the fog lifts. The key to that, of course, is spending time with the software. Now, again, we're not trying to just teach a course to learn software. We're trying to use the software to teach a concept, and that concept is framing decisions is important. This happens to be the software we use. So you'll be spending a lot of time with the software, but don't lose track of the fact that you're trying to actually model a decision or a decision, group of decisions. So when you tie it all together, it looks something like this. We add more detail. You'll see you can drill down on each of these pieces and add a lot of detail. I'm about to get to the walkthrough. I know you're basically waiting for that, so I'll get to it as soon as I can. Here's that drill down. For example, I drilled down on define or determine refund eligibility. You can see there's a lot of characteristics I can add to that, and you should. Remember, your professor, he or she, is going to grade this assignment, and part of it, the grading, is going to be on what level of specificity were you able to outline the decision process. So you can drill down and add multiple details, and you'll see that when I do the walkthrough. Now, this is the walkthrough that Mr. Taylor uses. Select a marketing offer. I hope some of you, maybe all of you, have already looked at that tutorial. It's about 45 minutes long. It's very detailed, very thorough, and very complete. I'm just going to add my own little version on a different problem. But as you can see, there is a decision right here called Select Marketing Offer. In every case, there should be one overarching decision, sort of the meta decision. What is it you're really trying to get to, for example, in this problem? What you're trying to get to is what kind of a marketing offer to provide, if any, to someone who's thinking of perhaps leaving your company. If you were a telephone company and you didn't want your customer to go to a competitor, what would you do? You can't give everybody extra storage or extra data, or you'd go broke. You can't just ignore those who are likely to churn, or you're going to lose customers, and it's very expensive to replace them. So you have to kind of decide what kind of is Steve Canode deserving of a marketing offer? Does it look like he's getting ready to churn, meaning leave the company, go to a different plan? So what do you need to do that? Well, you need some sources of information. What are the marketing offers that are available that we can even offer? What is the customer's information? What are the demographics? How long has he been with us, perhaps? And so forth. Those, of course, are information icons or information objects. These are expertise objects. Customer propensity to accept. Maybe we know from Mary's experience in the company, she can look at a record and tell you, I think he's 80% sure to stay. What are the marketing knowledge, know-how? Who has the marketing know-how in our company? Those are expertise icons or objects, if you will. The things in the rectangles are decisions. As I said, there always is one overarching decision, but there is always, or are always, subsidiary decisions that need to be made first that support that decision. Before I can select a marketing offer, I have to determine what product to offer. I have to check the offer timing. I have to determine what value that is to the company to offer that. And before I can determine this, I have to determine this, and so forth. So this is the very detailed and very thorough walkthrough that Mr. Taylor provides in his tutorial. Be sure to look at that. You can see that there is always an analytics effort tied to the marketing offer. So you will need to have at least one analytic effort embedded in your diagram somewhere. Now, we're not asking you to build an analytic model. You're not building a regression model. You're not building a decision tree. You're not building a dashboard. You're not building history. You're not building any analytics effort. You're simply outlining the kind of analytics effort you think would be useful or necessary to help with the decision. So you can see this is a customer churn likelihood model that he's put in here. That could be a regression model. It could be some other kind of predictive model, decision tree, sport vector, ensemble models, all the models you'll be learning downstream. But right now it's just a placeholder. It says, I think I need a churn model here. And you can see that's an expertise item which feeds into determining the customer loyalty. So that's just what he's going to walk you through. Now I'm going to give you something different. This is a model that one of our students built about 3 years ago. Mr. Taylor obviously was interested in whether or not we had students who were building rather interesting and useful models that he could look at and see if they how the program was working. And we showed him this one. And he said, aha, that is exactly the kind of model I'm looking for. May I use that in my advertising, basically. He's using it in his framing analytics requirements document that he wrote with our permission and the permission of the student? The answer was yes. So this is a real model that one of our Data 610 students created. Now, this person happened to be an expert in the world of banking, especially in the world of whether or not distressed mortgages should be bought or sold, or held or sold, rather, not bought or sold. So this is the model he built. The overarching decision was whether or not to hold or sell distressed mortgages. You know, distressed mortgages, people that get behind. If they get too far behind, they're probably a lost cause. You probably want to get rid of it. But, you know, there are certain rules about that. The FHA and the FHA have rules about what mortgages you can sell. You would probably have policies within your organization about which mortgages you want to sell. You may have requirements that they meet a certain threshold. Excuse me, I'm fighting a cold a little bit here. So you can see at first glance the thoroughness with which this student laid this out. Very well done. I'm no expert on this, so it was up to me as the student's professor to judge how well he did based on his ability to explain his model and to provide detail in his model. And that's what you need to do. So let me walk you through. I'm going to build just a piece of this. I'm not going to build the whole thing. That would take too long because, again, this is a very detailed model, but I am going to build a piece of this one. Okay? So at this time, I'm going to go back to my DecisionsFirst software. When you log in to DecisionsFirst, and by now, hopefully, you have your login information, you're going to see a screen like this. You will have the same screen I have with one exception. You won't have this admin screen. That's only for the faculty and Mr. Taylor. You'll have all the other icons. And you can see I've already done some work in here a little bit ago practicing, because I don't use this software every day, so I like to practice. But we're going to create a new model. We're going to start. Let me hover over some of these icons that you have. This is to create a new decision requirements document. Okay? Decision requirements diagram, rather. The diagram is part of the ARD, the Analytics Requirement Document. So a decision diagram is part of that. So let me create a new one. That's where you start. There it is. I got to give it a name. I'm going to call it Mortgage Walkthrough. Okay. Now, you would want to describe fully what that is. Again, every single object you put on the screen anywhere needs to have a very thorough description, because that's what your professors are going to be looking at to try to figure out what you've done. We're not experts in every subject. As I said, I'm not a banking expert, but by reading what this student did and how thoroughly he documented it, I was able to understand the decision process and evaluate the thoroughness of it. Let me say that I'm in North Carolina. My internet has been fine for the last few hours. It was up and down for a little while. So if we lose this, I have the walkthrough from the summer that I can refer you to, but I'm hoping this will go well. So you would describe this. Okay? Now, once you've done that, you might want to go over here and let's look at these icons. Save. Frequently, frequently, frequently. There is an automatic save feature in here, but I don't trust it, so I save often. The next one, export to image. When you get a very nice looking diagram, remember your decision requirements diagram on the screen, and you'd like to use it perhaps in an email to your boss, or you'd like to use it to show others or something, and maybe not want to show them the whole software, capture the image, export it, put it in a document, and send it to them. The next one is edit object. Any object you put on the screen, you'll be able to edit. I'm going to do that in a minute. Now, these next objects are used to print it. I'll show you that right at the end. Both of those work together to do that. Here's a delete. Here's a refresh. And all this does is zoom in or out, make the diagram bigger or smaller. All right, so let me refer back to my document that we're going to try to recreate. And I'm not going to do the whole thing, just pieces to show you how easy this is. Subtleties, but easy. So let's start. We want to start with the meta decision. Although it's possible just to start putting pieces on the screen and figure out how to link them later. You can work bottom up. you can work top down. Remember, you won't have this diagram in front of you. You'll be thinking through your decision and trying to decide what kind of decision do I need to make. You should, however, have the overarching or the meta decision in mind. In this case, it's whether to hold or sell a distressed mortgage. Okay, so I'm going to drag a decision object over. You can see it gets the generic name decision. And this is a rectangle, so it is a decision object. Hold or sell distressed mortgage. Okay. If I scroll down, there's a place for a description. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have the student's description of what that is. Here it is. You know, this is what the student paper had in it as part of the attachment. I'll talk about that later, but let me just copy that just to show you, you know, the kind of, whoops, thought I hit Control B. There we go. Okay. Balance sheet managers need to assess the current loan-to-value ratio of the property in order to be eligible to be securitized. Distressed mortgages cannot be underwater, meaning the loan amount is greater than the current property value. Okay. Now, that's not exactly the way I would have said it for that decision. Where did the decision go? Let me see. Maybe I just got to scroll up. There it is. And you can see the name has changed, and there it sits. Okay, so that's your meta decision. Now you begin to think this through, and you say to yourself, well, let's think. What kind of subsidiary decisions would I have to make first before I can decide this? And let's first back up and say, does this meta decision meet the criteria we talked about? Does it occur often? Yes. Does it have a bottom line impact? Yes. Is it trivial? No. So it meets 3 of the 4, and the 4th one would be automated. So, you know, it seems like a pretty good decision to model. So if I go back to my drawing, remember, you'll be thinking this through in your head. I have to put in another sub-decision. Before I can decide about holding or selling, I have to evaluate the profitability of selling the mortgage. What's that? It's a decision. I'll bring it over here. I'll change the name. Evaluate. Whoops, let me type over that. I'll just shorten it to evaluate profitability, and I will not put in a description. Although, again, will remind you, I would think you would want to have descriptions for every single object to make sure the professor grading your assignment understands it and can read it and understands thoroughly what you're modeling. So I would say you need a description for every object in some level of detail. Now I want to connect these, so you click on the connector and connect them. Okay, and then you do what? Well, first thing I want to do is save. Frequently, frequently, frequently is my motto. Now let's go back to our drawing. So we've got this decision, and in order to make this decision, we first have to make this decision and these others. I'm not going to model all these, but I wanted to show you how to bring in a different object. I'm going to bring in this thing called market bid prices. That is not a decision object. That is an information object or an input data. They changed the name to input data. So I'll drag that over, okay, and it's called market bid prices. If the prices aren't any good, we may want to wait a while, right? I can see where that would have some impact on things. Market bid prices, again, a very thorough description would be useful there. Now you'll notice again, this is connected to helping evaluate the profitability of selling the mortgage. So we can connect that. Right? Now, before I go any further, let me go back to this one. We put the object in, we put in a description of it, or would have, but we didn't really add a lot of detail. We didn't put a lot of flesh on the bones, did we? So let's highlight it. You can do this at any time. Come up here and say Edit Object. Now let's remember what the object is. It's a decision object. Edit Profitability. There would be the description had I typed one in. You can come down here and fill out these pieces. First of all, what type of decision is this? Well, this is an operational one, isn't it? What's the status level? Is it in process? Have we completed it? Has it been implemented? No, it's in process. Is there a URL we might want to go to help explain what that's all about? And by the way, I have had students do this. put some URLs in where they said, oh, I'm using something called market bid. Well, it wouldn't work on this. But on some objects, there is a nice URL where you can go. Maybe it's even Wikipedia or something. Okay? And so we can put things in there. Now, if we scroll down further, you'll see that here it's showing the diagram where it is in the diagram. It's hooked up to this thing, our meta decision. And if we scroll down further, you see there's some other things we can do. First of all, what's the primary diagram? Well, remember, I titled it Mortgage Walkthrough, the DRD, Decision Requirements Diagram. Every decision is basically a question. Every decision is basically a question. Okay? So let me go see what this question was. Evaluate profitability. Actually, I should have just done the first one, but that's all right. Is the mortgage value higher than owed? Every decision will have a question. The answer might be a yes, no, might be a value from a list that you type in, high, medium, low, red, green, orange, whatever you want. It could be from an external value list. It could be from a number, or it could be a number, rather, in a range. Maybe you say this answer has to be between 0 and 20. It could be a text answer. It could be a date, a time, it could be other, and so forth, a collection. So this one's a yes, no. Is the mortgage value higher than what's owed? And the default, meaning the answer will come up no unless you change it, I'll leave it at no. You can then put some supporting rationale in. Very important. You say, oh my gosh, this is going to take a lot of time. Yes, but when you're done, you're going to have something that everybody can sign up to, everybody can agree, everybody will know who's doing what, there will be no ambiguity about what it is you're doing. And then we come down to an interesting area. These are some rather subjective things, but they do help you understand the problem. First of all, the volume. How often does this occur? Well, this occurs a lot. In other words, we're in the mortgage business. We have these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of mortgages. There are many of them coming in daily that may be distressed. How complex are they? Well, they're reasonable. You know, again, that's some subjective, obviously. How much do they vary? Is everyone the same? Well, no, they vary. They vary moderately. You know, some people are way behind. Some people have extenuating circumstances, etc. Repeatable. Well, I would say if they vary a lot, it's probably not very repeatable decision process. It may have to be altered a little bit. Is it measurable? Yes, we can measure this quite well, can't we? And then what time do we have? Is it a short time? Yeah, well, and then you might want to put something in here about the time. These decisions are made daily. They are usually decided by the end of the day, on the day we find out about a distressed mortgage. If not, the value can decrease, or maybe it's monthly, whatever it is. Okay? And there'll be some other things we can fill in later. But right now, those are the things. And then you can leave a comment. Have Mary look at this because I'm not sure I agree with what I said here or something. Who knows? Here's the key. Every time you do this, you've got to hit submit or it'll go away. And then I come back up here and I hit save. Okay? So this is how you would add detail to every icon. Now, they'll be different. If I go back to my diagram here and look at market bid prices and say I want to edit that object, since that is an information item or a data item, it's different. A description, which of course you'd have. Data source, where are you getting this data? Remember, this is structured data primarily. This is not policy. This is not guidance. This is not expertise. This is usually numbers coming out of a spreadsheet or somewhere. So maybe it's internal or maybe it's external, but internal. Who's the owner? You could say Joe Smith, Mary Jones. How complex is it? A URL, et cetera, et cetera. So there's not as much to do on this one as there is on the other. Nonetheless, when you're finished, you still want to come down here and, you still want to make sure you save it. I guess it doesn't have a submit, but it does have a save. Okay? Then we go back to home. Now you'll notice these things are still open. I'm going to close that one. We still have the mortgage walkthrough. We have evaluate profit. We have market bid price, etc. We have home. If we go to home, you can see where we're at. Here's our diagram we're working on right now. So I've put in a couple of decisions. I've put in an information or input item. I have not put in yet an expertise item. So let me go look at my diagram. You'll notice that there's something here called mortgage trader expertise. We've got some very experienced people in the firm who have a lot of expertise and can sometimes override what we see with our analytics and say, no, I know that guy or I know that gal, they're good for it, whatever. Who knows what they'll say, but they have expertise, proven expertise. We want to use them. So I'm going to put that in, mortgage trader expertise. So that is a object that has this beveled thing. It's a knowledge source. Okay, here's the name. I'm going to change it to mortgage trader expertise. And again, you'd want to put in a full description of what that is. Now, let's go back to the diagram. That mortgage trader expertise feeds into two places, doesn't it? It feeds into the hold or sell, feeds into the evaluate profitability. So I'm going to bring it over here, and I'm going to connect it. Now, when you connect an expertise icon, you use the dotted line. Same way, click on it and then connect it. And I guess if you want to connect it to both, you can, since that's the way he did it in the diagram. Now, as you begin to see, and I'm providing, I know Mr. Taylor's walkthrough is much more thorough, but you're beginning to see how this works. The pieces have got to fit together to help someone understand how this decision can be made. Okay? You can also see, I'm going back to the home screen for a reason, you can also see all of the activity that has taken place on this diagram and who did it. Now, that would be great if there were 3 or 4 of us working on one diagram. Steve Canode said this, Mary Jones said that, Tom Jones said this, et cetera, et cetera. We would know when each person contributed whatever the change was and who it was. And that's important because we're trying to get to a point where we have something that everyone will agree this is what we need to solve this problem. So that's an important aspect. Again, underestimated by many, but I think it's an important aspect. Now, if we go back to the main screen, the home screen, you'll notice these other icons. And you say, why aren't those on the screen where I can use? Here's the DRD, the Decision Requirements Diagram. That means that we're just creating a new diagram. Here are the decision icons, which, again, we've been dragging and dropping, but you can also use these. I'm going to skip that one. Here's our input data. That was the oval. And here's the knowledge source, and that was the beveled rectangle. We have a lot of other objects. For example, we have one called objective. We have one called process. We have one called event. We have one called system. We have one called organization, new organization specifically. We have one called new data set. We have one called analytics effort. We have one called widget. I'm not even sure what that is. And this other one that says new report. Now, I'm not saying you need to use every one of these in your assignment. I am saying that it's good to use some of them because I don't see how you'd have a complete assignment without it. For example, objective. Objective I interpret as something similar to a KPI, key performance indicator. How will we know if this decision process is working? We need to have something, a measurable objective. Okay? So let me click on that, and you'll see it comes up. I can give it a name. I can say reduce distressed mortgages. Maybe that's an objective we want to do. Now, there's not a lot you can add to this in terms of you can view a URL, and then you get to decision impact. Every one of these, what I call subsidiary objects, has to be linked to one of the main objects. Remember, only 3 main objects: expertise, knowledge expertise, input data, decisions. So let me see if I can link this to a decision now. I'm going to say, I'll say eval just to see what comes up. Evaluate profitability. That's probably one I could link to it. So you click on that, and you drag it down here, and you sort of drop it down here, and there it goes. Okay? So that says that this objective is being used in conjunction with this decision. Now, that may not make a lot of sense here because I'm just showing off the software, but you want to make sure they are there. And of course, as always, you want to come down here and say submit, and you want to come up here and say save. I think you would always want to have at least one or more objectives in there that make sense. How will you know if this process you're outlining is working? Well, you'll know if and I didn't flesh it out, but you could have put in that objective. Our goal is to reduce distressed mortgages by 10% over the next 3-year period. That way you'd have something measurable that you can see how well you did. So that's one kind of subsidiary object I would think everyone would want to use. There's also another one you'd all want to use, and that's analytic effort. Every decision process that you do for assignment 1 must have somewhere in it an element of analytics. Again, that could be it doesn't have to be something you build. It might be a histogram, might be a dashboard, might be a decision tree, a regression model, who knows? We're not doing that in this. We're just saying I need analytics to support my answers. So let me go back to my diagram. Analytics efforts have to support expertise objects. Okay? So mortgage trader expertise. How am I going to support that with an analytics object? Well, going back to home, I'm going to go to the analytics object. And I'm going to say dashboard item showing distressed mortgages over time. That'll help this guy determine his expertise guy, right? Let's see, I need to type in a word that will bring up my, I guess I better go back and take another look. Mortgage trader expertise. Go back to this. Reduce distress mortgages. Oh, it can support an object. Well, that's good. I wasn't sure it could. There it is, mortgage trader expertise. It's easier than I thought. You just come down and click on the know-how, and this would bring up all of your knowledge items, and you could say which one it supports. I only have one, so obviously it's all brought up. So there it is, mortgage trader expertise. So it's now linked to that. You can put background in. You could say what type it is. Is it internal or external? And so forth, right? You could say the impact. Is it high, medium, low? You could update the association. You could point out a data set that it's tied to. You can do a lot of things. Again, the more detail you can add that makes sense, not just to be adding detail, to help understand the process, the better the model will look. Okay? Submit. Come back up here and say save. So by now you've seen a few examples of this. So now we're starting to flesh out our overall diagram. This again is a decision requirements diagram. Decision requirements diagram. Okay? Now let's say you're finished with it. You got it all done. And I think it should be fairly substantial. And you want to print it. Well, of course, you want to save it every once in a while. You use these two print icons. You click on this one, and you'll notice both of these grayed out. Okay? Both of these grayed out, which should just be temporary. There we go. And you get good news back. Print all output ready. Click on the Word button to download. So if I click on the Word button, it's going to say, okay, where do you want to save this file? And I will say, let's see, I'll call it fall 2018 output. And I'll save it. Now let me go find that. Where is it? Fall. There it is. I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to say open with Word. Now I'll tell you why I did that. Let me stop first. Fall 18 output. You will notice what it says it is, an XML file. What in the world is that? Well, XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. That's about as much as I know about it. Doesn't matter. You can open this with a Word software. So if I say open with Microsoft Word, it will open up nicely, and we'll see what we got. You can also then save it as a doc file. So don't worry about the fact that it says it's an XML file. There it is. I'm going to close this over here. And you can say enable editing. Now you say, what do I have? Well, the first thing you have, of course, is the diagram. There's the diagram. Now, if you have a substantial size diagram, it's going to be too big to fit on the page, so you want to shrink it. Because this is what I've now printed. I don't want to confuse you with the jargons. What I've now printed is the ARD, Analytics Requirements Document. This piece, the diagram, is the Decision Requirements Diagram. But let's see what else we've got. We've got each node listed, a decision node, hold or sell, and there's the description. Another decision node, and there's a description. And by the way, you can edit these. Let's say I think, so make my professor easy to read, I'm going to make all the decision nodes bright red and bold. And I'm going to make, that way he or she can see that these are decision nodes. This is a know-how node. I'll make it bold and I'll make it a different color. Just suggesting that the easier you make it for somebody to read it, data source, I'll make that blue, bright blue and bold, and so forth. So it starts out, and of course yours would be much more voluminous because you'd have many more things in it. It lists all the decision nodes, it lists the data source nodes, it lists the know-how nodes, then it goes back on each of those nodes and provides you with the details. We didn't add any detail on this one, but we did on this one. Remember, I said answer type is yes or no. The default answer is no. Here's some things that are linked to it. The market bid prices is an input. The knowledge source is linked to it, and so forth. Here was those measures that I slid the bars over on, high variable. So once you finish this entire thing, which could be many pages long, you have the ARD, Analytics Requirements Document. That would be the document everyone would say, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. And that will be an attachment to your first assignment. I'll say what's the guts of the assignment in a second, but that will be the attachment, the ARD. So it should be pretty easy to do that. Let me close that. Okay. In fact, I think I still have the ARD open from, this is part of the student one that he did. Part of it. I didn't put the whole thing out there. Again, you can have, he's got a lot of stuff there. Okay. All right. So where are we with the little walkthrough? I'm going to come back and do some more slides because I got a couple more things I want to do before my hour's up. There's a couple more things. So first of all, this is a little tricky. You had to push here, wait for both buttons to clear. You had to click Word. It was downloaded as an XML file, but it can be opened with Word and saved as a doc file, so not a problem. This was the Save button. There are some other buttons on the home screen that you certainly would want to use as you see fit. I'm not saying you need to use all of them. I do think it would be almost impossible to have a very good decision process that didn't have objectives. And of course, I think you need to have at least one analytic effort somewhere because our whole program is based on analytics. So we need that, right? The other objects, you can use them if you'd like. If you want to try those things. Again, more detail you add, the better job you do, the greater your chances of getting a better grade, obviously. No guarantees, but a better chance depending on how good a job you do. Now, there's one more thing that I always try to show, but I'm often hesitant to show. You know, if you're going to build a rather extensive diagram, you're going to end up with a lot of objects, aren't you? And there's this thing up here called Bulk Create. Bulk Create. I'll show you how that works. You can build your objects exactly as I did, one at a time, and drag and drop them, put them where you want them, do whatever you want to do with them, delete them if they don't work, have them all out there and not connected, and then connect them later, whatever you'd like to do. Or, if you'd prefer, you can bring them in bulk using the following process. So this is an optional thing. You may or may not want to do it. The first thing you do is go and build a spreadsheet. You're looking at a spreadsheet now, and guess what this is? Only 3 columns. Object type, name, description. That's all you can have, 3 columns. Object type, name, description. This is the actual set of objects that the student used to build the distressed mortgage example that I've been using. The object type, these have to be the object names, the object types that are allowed in Decisions First. Remember, they allow decisions, they allow input data, they allow knowledge sources, they allow business objectives, process, events, system, organization. So he used quite an extensive list, didn't he? So he's got about 26 objects here. He actually had about 50. I eliminated some of them. So he had about 50 objects. Here's 26 of them. Here's the name of the object. Here's the description. You then save this file as a CSV file, comma, separated values. CSV file. Okay? Then you go to bulk create, and the file has to be closed, by the way. And you say, I want to import this file, and I've got to go find where I put it. Here it is. Say OK, and say upload. Let's see if we get a good answer here that says it worked. Should. It doesn't take very long usually. It says succeed, success it should say, but succeed, bulk creation has been created. So I'll close this, and I'll go back to home, and you'll now see a whole bunch of objects over here. And if I said I want to search on portfolio, or now I can search on knowledge sources. Give me all the knowledge sources. Give me all the input data, objective. Okay. Created by all users or just me? Just me. Okay. So it'll bring up the different objects. Okay, and then you can drag them from there. So that's a shortcut way. Now, does it gain you any value? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. But there's one caution you have to use no matter how you create your objects. No matter how you create your objects, whether you do it one at a time, which is fine. It's probably the way I would do it because I'm not as comfortable with this process just because I think it's messy. But it may save some time. However you create your objects, I would advise you to, when you name them, put something at the end of them that is specific to you. And here's why. Each student does not have his or her own data set. Each section of our 610 course is sharing a data set. So you're in section 9040, you're all sharing one database. You're in 9041, you're sharing a database. You're in 9042, you're sharing a database. You're in 9080, you're sharing a database. So when you create an object, you want to make sure that it doesn't get confused by someone else creating the exact same object. Now, you know, in all the years we've been doing this, which is 4.5 years now, or we've been using Decision First for about 3.5 years, there's only been once or twice where students created this objects with the same name and confused the software a little bit. Nonetheless, I recommend you put, in this case, I put my initials at the end of it, SK Steve Canode 4. So that if someone else were to create an object that said hold or sell distressed mortgage, I would know which one was mine when I go to drag my object, because they're all going to show up. All the objects that are created are going to show up. So I know that's not the ideal situation, but that's how it works. Okay, well, let me go back to my slides because there's a couple of key things I want to give you an example. So first of all, when you get all done, this is what you're going to have. The analytics project document. You're going to have full documentation. There should be some KPIs or objectives in there, knowledge key performance indicators. There should be at least one analytic approach. There's going to be information sources, decisions, etc. Before I get to your questions, let me show a couple more slides. And you'll have these slides, by the way. I'll send them to your professor to post in the classroom. When you log in, if you haven't already heard this, you log in at modeler.decisionsfirst.com, and the first and one time only, you will have to load an add-in called Silverlight, which is not supported by Chrome. Not supported by Chrome. I use IE for all my Decisions First work. I think it'll work just as well with Firefox. It will not work with Chrome. Secondly, that complete walkthrough that I mentioned that Mr. Taylor does is at this link. I think you already have that from the earlier slides in the 610 overview, but there it is again. There are Decisions First tutorials, video tutorials on specific aspects at this link. What do I mean by specific aspects? A little video tutorial on how to use a knowledge object, a video tutorial on how to use a analytics object. All those many objects that were there, there's a separate video tutorial on each. If you'd rather have a written description and tutorial walkthrough, there is a written one here on each. If you go to support.decisionsfirst.com, you'll see many white papers that Mr. Taylor has written. You will see other links to case studies, etc. And finally, there is a special UMUC student tips page that he created just for our students. So these are very important links. You want to make sure you visit those. Now, at this point, you've seen the software. You sort of have some, at least, general feel for it. You won't be comfortable until you've done it many times and used it. But let me point out a couple other things. The assignment that's due at the end of week 3 is an individual assignment. We're not doing this in teams. You can use teams later on. We're looking for two things. We're looking for you to show clear evidence that you understand the importance and the concept of framing. And we're also looking for evidence that you have a good grasp of the software. I wouldn't say they're equally important. I think it's more important to understand framing than the software, but the software is the way in which you evidence that. So you want to pick a decision that, as close as you can, meets the criteria that we outlined. It's repeatable. It has a measurable impact. It's not trivial. Okay? So that means some people say, can I use building a home? Well, do you build homes every day? Are you a major home builder? Well, it's probably not that repeatable, and every home is so different that this process wouldn't work. So you want to think about that. So people always say then, well, where do I get my decisions? How do I come up with them? Well, that's up to you. Here are a couple of other examples. Here's one, and I'm sure there's more out there. Here's another example of using Decision First to model decision. This is a company that used it to select the most effective social networking service for each of their products. I don't know much more about it than that, but I can see it's pretty interesting, isn't it? The overarching mega decision was to select a social networking service. Do I want to use Facebook? Do I want to use Twitter? Do I want to use Instagram? Do I want to use all of them? And these were all of the things that went into that. You can see there's quite a few input items. There's several experience or expertise items. There's subsidiary decisions. Somewhere in here should probably be some sort of an analytic endeavor, maybe word cloud. That's a form of analytics. So that's one example. Here's another example. This is to accept or reject an insurance claim. That's something that occurs quite often at insurance companies, I'm sure. And again, you can see things like validating the provider, approve, reject, or flag as fraud before you figure out an amount to send out. And then there's input items, and there's expertise items. These are just a couple of examples. There are many out there. Again, you want to work on something you know well, or you can learn about well. Here's a third one, whether or not to order a property inspection. Okay? This one is interesting because it's mostly decisions. But there are some, there's some inputs. Here's an input, and there's a few expertise nodes. So whether or not, somebody's applying for a mortgage perhaps, or selling a house, do you want to inspect that? Well, look at all the stuff you have to go through to figure that out. These are real world examples that were provided by Mr. Taylor. Now, again, there's a lot of others. I picked this chart out because no matter what industry you're in, whether it's retail, communications, insurance, banking, healthcare, or customer analytics, these are the kinds of questions I think, for the most part, lend themselves to modeling with Decisions First. So maybe one of those is something you know a lot about or can learn a lot about, and you can choose one of those or something else. Sort of up to you. But I thought this would provide you with some examples. Okay, that's it for my slides. Oh, I wanted to say one more word about Was my sound off the whole time? Oh boy. I think I may have left my mute on for the entire presentation. That's unfortunate. Okay, here's what I will do. I will record it again and make that link available. I'm so sorry. I should have been checking, but I was busy doing things. You have the video, but let me record it again and send it out. So don't worry. If you didn't get the sound, don't worry about it. Oh, it says, no, we heard you. Oh, you were here for most of the presentation. Oh, okay, good. Let me stop the recording unless there are questions about the session. So it was heard. Good. I'm usually very careful about not muting myself, but okay, if I were muted for the last 5 minutes, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the last part is, but let me review it. The last part is for the assignment. Assignment 1, we will be attaching the ARD, the Analytics Requirements document. That was the thing I printed out, or saved. Actually, I didn't print it out, but I did the print and Word button, the XML file. That is an attachment. The ARD is an attachment to your assignment. In the first 3 to 5 pages, use that space, double space, to sort of provide some context and some background for the why you picked that decision, why you think it meets how well, and why you think it meets the requirements I mentioned, i.e., repeatable, non-trivial, measurable impact on the bottom line. Okay. So you want to make sure that you address those kinds of things, why you chose that decision, why it's important, etc. So that's setting the context, because remember, your professor is going to be grading your assignment based strictly on what he or she sees in that document. So the first 2 or 3 pages are sort of saying, okay, here's what I chose, here's why I chose it, here's why it meets the requirements, pretty much. You know, maybe some meet it better than others, and then here's the attachment. So it's a pretty straightforward idea there. But the more context you can provide in those first 2 or 3 pages, the easier it is for the professor to say, okay, let me see if he or she did a good job in addressing what they said they were going to do. So that's the intent. And again, you can use the DecisionsFirst software throughout the program. So if you find a use for it elsewhere, that's fine. The license is good for about 6 or 8 months. If you need to get back in, I can always re-enroll you. We do a rolling thing with Mr. Taylor, so it's not a problem. Are there any questions about specifics things? Now, again, I'm not here to help answer too many specific questions about the software, because you need to play with that. But I would like to address anything where I've not been clear in terms of what it is you're going to be doing. And I do appreciate so many people showing up. I know we don't give any extra credit for live attendance, because we have people all over the country and sometimes all over the world enrolled in our program. But it is nice to have people here, because if I do something really silly, you can help me correct it. All right, well, I'm going to stop the recorder. As I said, I will send the slides